user interface is exposing to you. So it doesn't go with anything else. And all it knows is how to use these particular types of parameters. And so we've written a sort of generic user interface that inspects those definition objects and presents you it as intuitive of an interface as we could do generically. And that's what this is. You still seem confused, right?
No, I'm now trying to imagine how you persist these things.
Well, that's where the serialization comes in at the moment.
Okay.
So, yeah, when you persist these, they go into the serialized object table in the database. Basically, all definitions are put in there. So if you're implementing reporting and you're wondering what tables are your critical tables you need to preserve to keep your reporting objects, your save definitions, your reports, your cohort queries, your data sets, that's the serialized object table.
So we can add a new type of query.
Correct.
By generating a class that will do it, and then that class gets serialized?
You write a simple bean with properties.
Okay.
And when the user configures that bean, and they save that as a definition, that bean is serialized to the database. So the properties are serialized using the serialization module. And that's why that module is a dependency of reporting.
Okay.
Sorry, this may be a step backwards, but we were just talking about it. We don't fully understand it. Sorry, just a step backwards. We, I think, missed something. For the cohort queries, can you explain the difference between those and the data set definitions? Is it that the cohort queries apply to your data set definition?
Sure. I mean, they could be the same thing. So, for example, if you had a data, well, they're not the same thing, but if you had a data set definition that was a SQL data set definition, and that said select patient ID from patient where some criteria,
Right.
that's going to produce a list of patients, which you can do something with. But that's not what you're limited to with data set definitions. You can get anything out, and it's generally it's a table of data. If you're just selecting patient ID, it's going to be a table with one column. If it's 100 columns, 100 pieces of data, it's going to be 100 columns. And it's just a table of data that meets that criteria. A cohort query is what patients meet this criteria that I'm specifying here. What patients have a min age of X, a max age of Y as of a particular date. And the system will not give you anything back but a cohort. And a cohort is just a set of patient IDs that match that criteria.
And that's
So if I understand it correctly,
that cohort is then used to create a report, and in the report you can say for that cohort give me, like specify different things. Whereas for the data set definition, it's just
You can think of the data set definition as being the columns, and the cohort query essentially gives you what rows are things. Or at least
for a particular type of thing.
Yes.
Right. Does that make sense? I mean, the data set could be both. I mean, if you say, give me patient ID, gender, and age, where patients are in this criteria, that's limiting the rows as well as the columns. A data set definition gives you a table of data. That could have anything. A cohort query gives you a set of patient IDs, and you can do something with that. And one of the things you can do with a set of patient IDs is say how many patients are in that set, right? So that's where cohort queries become useful in indicator reporting, because most of the time you want to say how many patients meet this criteria for my report, how many patients enroll in the HIV program by the start of the period, how many have have this outcome during the period, right? And so the way to do that is you search for patients and you report the number of patients that meet that criteria. So often what we're seeing for the indicator reports, and this is why we supported this initially, we first create a cohort query that can find those patients, and then you add that cohort query as the backing object of an indicator, saying I want to use this cohort query, and we're going to see this in a second. And what I want to do with that is I want to return the count of the patients in that cohort query, and that's going to be the value of the report. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Okay.
What's
Ryan, are you happy? Ish?
Keep it coming.
We
Keep
can
it
talk
coming.
offline later.
Yeah.
So, I think the important point here is that this user interface gives you a means for defining what criteria you want to make a particular type of query. In this case, we're making a query about age. And these are the ways that it's currently possible to query for age using this type of query. And so I'm going to save this here. You can see that, again, just to reiterate, I made min age, max age, and age date parameters. I could have made them fixed values if I had wanted to. So if I, preview these, you'll see, this just evaluates right away. I have, 3,000 odd females. I've got about 1,800 males. And for the age range of date, I have to specify the criteria. So I want to know, say, how many children in the ages 0 and 14 as of the start of the month. I can run that, and I can see I have 524 patients in the system that meet that criteria. In the cohort query world, the real value of the parameters is that you can define one of these things once, and you can reuse them throughout multiple definitions in different ways. So if you had a report and you had two indicators, which were number of children as of the start of the reporting period, and number of children as of the end of the reporting period, you could just define this one in age range on date query once, and then you could use that two different times. One time where you're mapping the effective date parameter to the start date of the period, and the other where you're mapping the age date to the end date of the period. And the framework can do that kind of thing. So using these as sort of the baseline, maybe I'll create one other cohort query. I don't know much about what's available in test data sets. Well, never mind. So, if you look at the data set definitions that are here, there are some that allow you to sort of go straight to the cohort definitions. Right? If you don't want to bother with indicators, or you just want to say, assume that the cohort, we're going to just want counts of patients in the cohorts, you can create what's called a cohort cross-tab data set here to produce a table of sort of numbers of patients that meet certain criteria. So you'll see that I can add parameters to this. In this case, I'll add a date parameter. And I can add rows and I can add columns. So in this case, for a row, I'll add males. I'll give it a key of just males. And the key is just how it's referred to in this particular data set. If you want to reference that particular element that you've added, you refer to it by that key that I put in. And I'll add another row, and that'll be females. Now, if I want to cross that with other criteria, I can add, say, some over here. Maybe I want to have, and you can see when I choose the age range on date, it allows me to specify how I want to use that particular query. I can provide fixed values for the parameters, or I can map those parameters to something in the definition that I'm adding it to. So in this case, I'm going to specify some fixed values. I want to see age 0 to 14. I'm going to call this children. And I'm going to say as of the parameter, which is the date of the dataset definition that I'm adding it to. So it'll pass the date given to the dataset definition, and it will use that to evaluate this particular column. And then I can add another, again, the same definition, and I'll say it's going to be 15 and up as of the same date. And I can just go to the data definitions page, and I can preview this. Hopefully everything works. I'll give it a date, and you can see I have a result. And I mean, this particular format of the result isn't super helpful, but it does show you all the data crossed with each other and the results that you have. So already we have two data set definitions here. Maybe that's all we need. We want to put these in our report. So I'm going to go back into my report definition, and I'm going to add my simple SQL. Call it SQL. I'll map the date, or the birth date that I put in there, to to the date parameter of the report that we added. So you can see this report has date parameters, that's what I'm using. And I'm going to add also the age and gender, which also has a date parameter. And I'm going to map that through as well. So now if I were to run this report, I'm going to go into the reporting tab here. This is where, once you define your reports, this is where people who just want to run and use reports, we go into this interface. And there's different things that they can do here. They can run reports, they can look at queued reports, they can schedule reports to run at a later time, etc. So I sort of want to quickly get into that stuff pretty soon because there's a lot of new features there that I want to cover when we have time today. So in this case, I'll just pick my test report that I wrote. I have to enter a date. I can also enter an expression here. So if I wanted to schedule this, for example, and I wanted to always run as the date was scheduled, there's certain expressions you can add there to indicate, the time the report is run as opposed to a particular fixed point in time. Like many things in the reporting module, that needs a bit more documentation. And again, if you didn't specify your base cohort at the time you defined your report, you can specify a base cohort at this point. So you can choose females or males or what have you. And you can schedule it to run at a later time or you can run it immediately. Now, all reports in the reporting module will run asynchronously. That one happened to run pretty quickly. It was done asynchronously. And if it was a long-running report, you would see it spinning and see the status of it until it finished. And when it finished, you would see the page look like this. That allows you to sort of kick the report off. You can go off and do other things in the system. You can come back, you check on the status, and you don't have to sit around that page while it just loads interminably. For some pretty long reports, it can take hours or several minutes at least. So that gives you that capability. And then you can look at this report in the default sort of web viewer. SQL didn't produce any data, but the age and gender produced the cross-tab data set that we had defined, which was as follows.
How did we get into that format?
This is just the default web renderer. That's just the reporting module. This is completely new web renderer format that existed in the last version. It's intended to. So one of the complaints, well, one of the things that we had ticket raised with in the reporting module recently was that a default web renderer like this, where you could view any report in the web, was not available for all types of reports. So if you had particular data sets in the report, there was a bug where there was no way to view it unless you exported it to some external file like Excel or something like that. And so we made an effort to make a new renderer that rendered any type of data set in the report in a format like this and tried to make the best approximation of what a nice format of that data set would look like within the report. This is just the default that comes with the system. It allows you to preview reports. It has a feature where if you click on this, you'll see more details behind what patients are in there. You can scroll through their records and you can see why they're in that particular cohort. You can click on their patient ID and you can be brought into their patient dashboard and you can.
What I'm really asking here is, when we saw the preview of the crosstab report element, okay, it was a 2-column output.
Correct.
Now, was that 2-column output processed to produce this 2x2 table, or when we did the preview of it, we saw a 4x2 table? Okay, now it's out as a 3x3 table. Okay, so did this 3x?
It's the same. They're both 2x2.
It was a 4x2, now it's a 2x2.
No,
Or 4x1, but now it's a
because
2x2.
I'm counting the key column, right?
Yeah.
So before we had a key column with the data and we had 4 rows in it. Okay, now we have key, column 1, column 2, and we have three rows in it. So did that 4x2 get reformatted into this, or was some other raw data set output reformatted into this.
Okay, yes. So behind the scenes, this is a simple map of columns and values. It's a 4x2. And this particular renderer knows that its underlying representation is meant to be a table of data. And so it reformats it to look like this for the user. But it's not stored that way behind the scenes.
Okay.
And I have shown that's very good features. We can use cross stuff. But my question is, what is for the sub-report? Sub-report in report. Yes.
So no, there's no notion of sub-reports in reports. I think so. Thus far, just having multiple data sets within a report is sort of the path we've taken to support sort of multiple types of data sets. So here we have a SQL data set and a cross-type data set. You can also have a broker patient data set or something like that in there, and then you can operate those in different ways. But no, we don't have sub-reports.
Are you wondering that because Jasper reports does some reports, and you want to be able to take the data from there and put it into a
We can
Jasper?
always report in, for example, we have this report, and between in this report we have sub-report for essence or something like that.
For example, when we use Jasper report, we will only use sub-report and cross-stuff functions and something like that. Yeah? And I don't know for whether this our module is sub-report function or.
Slightly, yeah.
He's basically running a drill down, I think. What I'm thinking you're talking about is like being able to drill down into like that patient set and see like more, and each of these links contains a way of getting at least the raw data, and you can that right now there's nothing there that will let you like produce some other format, I guess, but you could probably turn this into another cohort indicator report or something like that, if you define it that way, but it's not supported at the moment.
So, the architecture is such that you have a report definition that contains data set definitions, and that produces, when it's evaluated, it produces a report data object. That report data object basically contains a list of data sets that contain data, and that data can be anything in your system. So, in this first case, we have a report data that's been evaluated. It has a data set that contains a table of data for the SQL and a table of data for this test report. Now that table of data is the actual raw Java object data that was produced. It's date objects and integers and patient objects and the like. Now this here is so that's just the data behind the report. The next element is rendering that report out and displaying it. And so that's decoupled in the reporting module. So we have, you have the data, you have the report. How do you want that developed, and what do you want to do with it? And so in this case, we just have a simple renderer which iterates across the data sets. And for certain types of data sets, we'll try to lay them out in certain ways. And it'll just do a sort of two-string on those elements in there. It's not sophisticated. But we have other more sophisticated renderers in the system, which I can show you, which do different things with this.
Just a very simple here. For example, H. Here this is 14, 13, something like that. And I was for compare with the 2 and 4 with 10. That means here for 14 that's 2, 13 is 2, 9 is 4, 9 is 4, H is 4. This can do it for this my proposal.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question.
You have here H column, yes? This is first line, this is 14. And I don't know to see 14, I want to compare with 10. That means 14 is 2, 13 is 2, but H is 4. You know what I mean? And our table result, this is 2, 4 for each column, not the number. We compare with 10 number.
Maybe calculate power.
I mean, there are different ways you can do this. You can either take the data that's been produced and you can transform it yourself in your renderer. So if you got this table of data and you have a renderer which you want, for example, in Excel, you can say, dump this data into Excel and run a formula on that column to transform it, or write a custom renderer in Java which takes that data and transforms it whatever way you want to. The other alternative is to do it in the data set itself. So, I mean, in this case, this is a default view of the data set, but yeah, you can produce, in this data set, you could produce, if you wanted to act the actual patient data behind the scenes, you could just produce a patient data set that contained that. So in the earlier example where I was exporting person ID and birth date, whatever, you could run that calculation in that query.
That's a properties of one object.
I mean, from example, that is all properties of one object. When you have two objects, that is easy to do that. But that is all property of one object. And my question is, we can change the type of one property of one object. You understand what I mean? The age, name, full name, birthday, that is properties of one object person. And we can change the one property of this object. That's when we have two objects here, that is okay. I understand that. But my question is for properties of one object.
Okay, I don't think I'm fully understanding the question, but maybe we can talk about this after the session.
Thinking of the future here, is there any thought about splitting out the code that generates the data set from the rendering part on purpose, like letting you be able to generate a temporary table so that you can call an external reporting tool that's heavily formatted and format that way?
Absolutely. I mean, we definitely need to look at solutions for, particularly in that case, and solutions for integrating with external reporting tools to do more powerful things. And I mean, the render, if you mean with the rendering to the data generation, that's already done. Or
Mike, you could also.
What I'm trying, ultimately, what I would like to see gotten to is a tool that where you strengthen the query part of this a little bit more, possibly with a meta dictionary-driven English set of explanations for the fields and that sort of thing, so that the users can do that and then drive that into a reporting tool. Then all of a sudden the data is a lot more accessible.
Justin, do you have a comment on that?
I was just going to say, like one of the ways that we are integrating with new or the bird module, Summer and the Google Summer Code was exporting using the CSV render or the XLS render and exporting to that, and then having a bird report render pick that up and run that with that CSV file. So it's not really an ideal pipeline, but there is a way, or we should add something in to after the data, sort of this data set generation is hard, store that in a temporary way and let you pull it into another reporting framework.
One thing that's been recently introduced to the framework is the notion of report processors, and I can show you an example of that in a minute, but essentially, this may be covering this particular use case. I mean, basically what will happen is the report will run, the renderer will run, and then you can configure one of our report processors to run either automatically or on demand on that data, and that may say save, take the generated data and put it in a temporary table or write it in a file system or email the report to one or more users or something like that. Is that along the lines of what you're thinking about?
Yes. I mean, there are Just my last comment. There are organizations that have a fair amount of time and money invested in reporting tools like Crystal Reports or something, and they have features for distributing reports to users and all kinds of things like that. You guys don't want to rewrite the word processor. So with that in mind, if there's some way to make getting data out of the system and query system, the front end of this, a little more easy than that would be.
I 100% agree with you. And you know, initially we were really just trying to support, you know, general query and reporting needs, you know, within OpenMRS, you know, for implementations that don't have external reporting tools to leverage. With a lot of these tools, but definitely moving to a situation where you're just exporting data and that other tools can leverage. You can build reports outside of OpenMRS. I mean, Justin is the most experienced of us with doing that. And his work in the past with BERT, for example, is along those lines, and leveraging external reporting tools and communities of reporting tools that can be used to produce output. And I don't know if you want to talk briefly about BERT or data warehousing or your sort of experiences with that, but I mean, anyone that has sort of particular interest in using BERT or other third-party tools like Jasper or sort of data warehousing in general and how the reporting module might integrate with that. I mean, Justin will be a good resource as well to chat about that.
I don't want to talk about BERT, but there's also Darius, I guess, was working on the REST API for the reporting framework, which I think will go somewhat towards being able to expose the queries and the data through a REST API within OpenMRS. But the thing that needs to happen on the other end is within BERT or within Crystal Reports, you know, creating a plugin or a module within those systems to pull that data from OpenMRS, and maybe, you know, building a query language that will let you create these like data sets and reports on the fly from these external tools. But, you know, as a first pass, being able to say what kind of data sets do you have available to, you know, within Crystal, you know, open up Crystal Report and say what kind of data sets does OpenMRS have for me right now, and being able to say, okay, give me the, you know, agent gender data set, and pulling that is hopefully going to be possible soonish. I don't know if it is already.
So the answer to my spot grid question is that I write a ops-based query that pulls out the actual ops that are related to observing the taking of the drug, okay? And I parameterize that on patient, and in the cohort part, I choose my active patients or whatever group of patients I want to run spot grids for. And then I write my spot grid renderer bean, and is it just a bean?
It's a class.
A class. So I write my spot grid renderer class, which will take in the data for a single patient, all the ops for a single patient, or is it going to have to do the iteration itself? And, you know, but that would take care of lining up the, you know, rows are for drugs and months and columns are for days. And
yeah, yes, more or less. Although I think, I mean, the part that, so getting the actual data you want to present in the columns itself is something that is typically not done in the renderer. It's done in the data set definition.
Right.
And, you know, we are moving toward a framework where we have, for different types of data, you can say, I want, you know, these particular person data elements or patient data elements or ops data elements. And so you would have two different sort of axes. You'd have what ops am I concerned with, and then what data about those ops am I concerned with. And there are ways of modeling that within the definitions in the framework. We combine those together into a data set definition. And then you would use your renderer to decide how you want to lay those out in your final output. Are we agreeing? Okay.
Next.
Okay, so is this a custom report and you just drop your cohort tab data set into it and that's how that's generated?
Correct. So I've only scratched the surface, and there's a lot of other things that I wanted to cover, but I don't know how much time we have in the session. When does it go until? No. 12:30?
Close to whenever you want.
Probably 12:30.
Okay. Well, I mean, so we haven't covered really cohort or indicator reports, yet. We haven't really covered more complicated renderers like the Excel template renderer or the HTML template renderer, and we haven't really covered processing and scheduling, like emailing reports or scheduling reports for later. I could do that, or we could open it up to maybe is there anyone here that has reports they've written in the reporting module and wants to share those with others to show sort of what's possible and what can be done?
Well, what I was going to say, I was planning on being in the lab today anyway. The team that I work for, we don't really use the user interface, not because there's anything wrong with it, but because we build all of our definitions through the code and have done some fairly cool stuff in the code. I can report on encounters, I can report on the new extended drug orders, I've got patient level reporting up and running in a few examples, as well as road to patient and some pretty cool indicator style reports. So I was planning on being in the lab sort of stuff anyway, so if we don't have time in this session, if anybody does want to see the kinds of things we can do, I've got 45 different reports that I can show and tell. Yeah, we still run the reports through the UI, we just don't actually build the definitions through the UI. So if you do have developer support available, and you wanted to see what was actually available, if you've got developers who could build the definitions, what we can actually get out of the system. And admittedly, most of the stuff I've done, the plan is to put it back into the UI and get some ways to build it with the UI. But at the moment, obviously, this is an iterative process. So if people do want to see some of those reports, I will be available in the lab session and can talk you through any of those if we don't have time now.
Is the code posted anywhere?
Yeah, so everything we do using a module called Rwanda Reports that is now in Git. It was in SVN until 2 days ago, but it is actually on the GitHub as Rwanda Reports, and that has every single definition, all the Excel templates and everything that we currently use. They may not make much sense out of context of Rwanda, but at least all the code is actually there.
Yeah, and also, I guess a plug for the PH and the Malawi module also has a bunch of very interesting sort of rendering of reports going on with some complicated formulas on Excel spreadsheets that are populated and things like that. And the NDRGB module uses the reporting module framework as well as many, many other modules that extend it. So, I don't know how to really get a vote out of the group here, but I'm I want to make sure that I'm not monopolizing the conversation.
I was just going to echo the opposite stat. I kind of really like to see a cohort indicator like very quickly.
Okay, well please continue to ask questions as I talk so that we can keep this interactive. Right, so in order to build a cohort indicator report, we need indicators, and we may or may not want to use dimensions, but I'll show you an example of each of those, and you can use them or not use them as the case may be. At the moment in the UI, as I said, we only support cohort-backed indicators, but there is a new SQL-backed indicator, which would allow you to say count the number of encounters or obs or program enrollments or relationships or whatever you want to count, or do other things in counting if you needed to. In this case, we'll just do a quick number of adults indicator, and you see it's a count or a fraction. I'm not going to get into logic for now, but that allows you to do more complicated things like average CD4 count for a cohort. I'll need to add a date parameter to this because this is talking about adults, and we have a query referring to adults as patients on a certain date or ages on a certain date. And I can add my cohort definition there, so you can see an age grade known date. I'm going to say again 15 and above. And if you start reusing the same sort of parameters that you here for adults and children, you may want to just create a color definition that's a bit more specific than the one we created before. But so you can see that general fields you can fill out parameters like every definition, name and description like every definition. The type this is going to do a count. There's this location filter attribute, and I personally haven't found that useful yet. We added it because there are some indicators which are very specific. Their calculations are different depending on what location you're running them for. So, if we're talking about, well, you may want to do a particular query based upon the location where someone enrolled in the program, or where they are currently in a particular program, or the place they last visited, or something like that. And so, adding the location filter here allows you to abstract that away from the actual color definitions backing the indicator, the main calculation of the indicator. I'm not going to use that for now. So really all this is doing is it's going to return me a count of adults as of certain dates. And if I preview that, it does what it operates as that does. And I suppose I can do another one quickly for children. And maybe just, I'm not sure. Query here for the always convenient all patients query. Not very interesting query. And I'll now create an indicator which is maybe a fraction. Percent children. Make that a fraction. And then so you can have a numerator or a denominator query that you can apply to that. So bear with me here. I didn't specify a parameter since this is giving the option to map it. So you see what happens if you don't specify a parameter. So now I'll say again 0 to 14 on that lead parameter. And the denominator will be everyone. And I can preview that, and hopefully it shows something a little more interesting. Right, so around 10% of the patients. Now, for dimensions, it's similar to all the other examples we've seen. The dimension, as I said, is sort of a collection of queries that represent a sort of a spectrum values. So this is a gender dimension. And I don't need any parameters on this, but I will add in males and females. And I can preview that, and you can see it breaks down the options. It gives you the convenience of a question mark at the end, just to make sure you didn't miss anybody inadvertently. Now we can data set definitions. You can see there's a cohort indicator with dimensions data set. Bit of a mouthful. Ever-present date parameter. And maybe I'll say I'm going to add a dimension, which is my gender dimension. So and all this does is add it to the report so I can use it. It doesn't do anything with it yet. It just makes it available with that key in the report so I can refer to gender. And now I can add an indicator like indicator 1, I'll say it's going to be number of adults, and I'll label that as that data parameter. And I can either use all or none of the dimensions in that particular dimension. If I added more dimensions, it would give me all the different options that I could add in images to the product of those things. So I'll just say I want male and female. And you can keep adding some of these indicators if you want to. And I don't preview this here, but hopefully it will show something pretty. Well, not super pretty, but it did the work. And now we can go and we can add that to our report. And again, this is just using a custom report, add it to yourself. I prefer that sort of approach. Rather than hiding a lot of the magic behind the scenes, to say, look, these are, what this does is it will give you a custom UI that abstracts the data set definition, and you don't realize you're creating a data set, but you are. My preferred approach thus far, at least with the initial interfaces we're creating, is to just give the appropriate interface for the appropriate definition you're creating, and then automatically combine those as needed. I think we need to work on our interfaces, but that's the approach we're taking thus far. So, I have my indicators in here. That's another thing we should talk about. For those of you that have used the reporting module before, this week, I've removed all the default render options from the UI and just left the web preview there. It used to have CSV, TSV, Excel default, HTML default, and a bunch of other things that were pretty so random up, but that we decided was useful at the time when we first rolled out the module. And there have been a lot of requests for limiting those options in the UI to only those that people explicitly want to have there. So there are now mechanisms where you can add those back in, but only if you choose to do so that you can have better control over which rendering, how the reports are specifically rendered by the users that you're defining the reports for. So don't be alarmed if you notice those all disappear when you upgrade. Okay, so you can see that SQL one is still not working yet. We need to look into that. We still have the age and gender working, and now we have our indicators. It looks like this one could use a little bit of improved, maybe default UI around it, given the way things are presented with the 2.gender equals female notation as the sort of number of the indicator, but that's what it's doing at the moment in this particular render. And your renderer can do whatever you want with these values. And you can print them however you wish. So, Joaquin and Tobin, since you guys requested this, does this make sense? Is it too shallow level detail? Is it too much? Do you want to see something additional?
No, it's helpful for me.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted.
It was especially helpful to clarify the difference between an indicator period report and a custom report. It's really just the fact that it's doing the data set for you.
Yeah, and the period indicator report is actually a different type of data set than this one.
Okay.
But yes, it is doing a different type of data set for you that handles things in a slightly different way.
So if I wanted to, could I do a custom report based on an SQL query and format it in an Excel template?
Funny you should ask. Yes, I'm running Ubuntu, and I'll have to see whether I can produce an Excel template quickly to demonstrate that will work, since OpenOffice isn't exactly the same as Excel, but I can try to quickly do that at the moment, if you guys are willing to bear with me for a second.
Get one.
Sorry?
Just get one.
Get one?
Get.
Okay. Do you have an example?
Not me. She does.
Okay. So, it should be pretty quick, but bear with me a second. Essentially, there's a set of documentation on the wiki. It is a lot of work. There are some sections that are better than others, or at least have more information than others because they've been particularly confusing. And I mean, thanks to James for helping to fill those out as he's tried out some of these new features that are really only exposed under the hood. So in this case, there's building. I can't even find where it is. Designing reports, I think. So I just recently rewrote this page because it was time. And because I changed the way renders work in the system. And so it really just lays out why this is now only that one default web render and what you can do about it. And there's these configurable renders that you can use. And it lays out each of the different types that are available now. And it gives some information about how you can configure those. So you can see that there are options like the CSV renderer. If you have a simple report with one data set and you just want to output that to CSV, pick the CSV report renderer, takes no configuration, and there's your data, wherever you export it to in CSV format. There's an XLS report renderer, which again takes no parameters. Just like the CSV one, it can support multiple data sets. So one or more data sets, they'll be in one or more tabs in an Excel sheet as a simple table with columns as the column names and the data in that sheet formatted in a useful way. The XML report renderer probably needs a bit more work, but it makes some decisions about how it wants to construct XML, and it create a particular set of data set elements with rows and columns and values for all the data in the report, and we'll export it. So it does what it does. I don't know that I would trust this format's going to stay stable for any length of time, but you can use it if you want to get data out of the system at the moment. I would rely on it personally. And then we have simple HTML, which just outputs your report as tables in an HTML file. Each data set is a table formatted in HTML, which you can view in a document format. And then the sort of two most powerful ones that we have, which is the Excel template and the text template renderer, which allow you to take your report and to do lots of complicated things in Excel and text-based formats, including scripting with Ruby and repeated rows, repeated columns, repeated sheets for certain data set elements that you have. I'm not going to go into all that complexity here, but if somebody is particularly interested in the kinds of things that they can currently do with Excel templates, for example, repeating rows of Excel templates. So if you have a data set you want to repeat a certain n times in an Excel sheet, and you want that to just span 2 rows, that is possible. It's somewhat documented, and we can go over exactly how you accomplish that. So, I'm going to look at my report, and you can see, essentially, the way you reference data in an Excel or text template is by the data sets and the column name. In this case, because we have 3 data sets, we have to qualify what data we're looking for. And in this case, I'm looking for, indicators, and there's one called one.gender equals female. I think that's probably what I have to look for in the template. So I'm just going to copy this text, or I shall create a. This is probably a bad example of report that does this on actually, but we're gonna go for it anyway. So my Excel template, and then you can put in, indicator 1 you reference like this by default. So you surround the sort of, actually it's not one, it's, what was it called? Indicators, dot one. So the name of the data set, dot, and then the name of the column that you want to display there, surrounded by hash. And you can put whatever you want around this. Obviously, you can say value indicator one. I believe you can also do hash indicator dot two dot name. I think if you just want to pull the name of the indicator from the report. This is documented on the wiki, and I can say this is indicators dot two. Let's do those for now. There's also some sort of contextual values you can use. I think one of them is called context.generation date. I think, and you can then format that using notation like dd YY. Yeah, this is somewhat documented. Or if you don't want to format it, you can just take the formatting out and see what appears. So I'm going to save this in XLS format.
Mike, you wanted a list of patients.
Well, I know. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just trying to make this work first. Let's get into that second. So I have that. Now I have my report. So the way to add a new render is to go back into your report administration. And you can either do this from this report designs tab here. I have nothing added. Or you can go into the specific custom report and you can have this output designs area down here and you can add a new one. So this is going to be called, call this Excel. And it fills in the report definition that I'm using because I'm already on this page. I'll choose an Excel template renderer, and then my resource file, I will upload my template. Design properties, this particular renderer uses, but this simple example doesn't need any. So I've added that design. Now we'll see if this template may not work because it's an open office-based document, but if I go into my report now and I try to run it, you can see there's now two options available. There's the web preview that was there before, and there's now my Excel, the design I named Excel. And that's running. Something happened. And it exported it. And it did. So. There's a lot more that you can do with these. You can, as James was alluding to, you can repeat. So if we have our this particular data set here, the age and gender data set, or the single data set, you have every patient in there repeated as one. There's columns or it's rows or there's new sheets. So you have one sheet per patient in the data set, and then you use the data in there to have a patient summary view within that sheet. There's a lot of different interesting things you can do with that renderer. So, I mean, our intention is to have renderers built into the reporting module that can do some interesting things that might be useful for lots of different implementations. We're not trying to do everything, and like you're saying, not building Word, not trying to solve the same problems that much better resource organizations have already solved than I could do, or I can do ourselves. So, any questions around that feature?
So if I had a SQL data set in my template, could I say where each of the columns go?
Yeah, I mean, without demonstrating it, I can demonstrate it later. You put each column name in the sheet wherever you want it to be. So you pick a row, for example, and you say, on B, I want to put name, C, gender, whatever, you do hash, dataset name.name, hash, dataset name.gender, etc. And then in your design properties that we didn't fill in, you would have a property called like, I think it's called repeating sections equals, and then you have to say, what is the data set you want to repeat on? What is the sheet name number you want to repeat on? What is the row in that sheet you want to repeat on? And it will identify that property is there, and it will go to that row, and it will say, okay, and now I'm going to repeat this. I'm going to clone this row with once per row in that data set, basically, and replace the values.
Is there a way to just simply say output, like, you know, I've created this design, output it into Excel, all of it exactly the way it is, as opposed to having to be, you know, for each one put indicator.1, indicator.2, indicator.3?
You mean, where to put it? I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah. Basically, like the report we saw, right, it created, you know, I mean, it had a format of one column of names and one column. Oh, no, right. So go back to the web renderer. Basically, is there any way, as you know, you showed us the web renderer, you know, where it had either it was 2 by 2 or it was, you know, just 2 columns. Is there a way to just say export to Excel exactly, either in that one or in the age and gender, whichever one? Is there a way to just say export it in this format out to Excel as opposed to having to do the formatting of the Excel yourself?
No. Sorry? I mean, the default Excel renderer will create a new Excel document and create one tab per data set and spit out your data in a table. I mean, in this case, although it's a cross-tab data set that shows up in the default web renderer in a table format, as I was saying to Roger, behind the scenes, that looks like this. It's flat. And it makes the Excel default when we don't know how to do anything but produce something that looks exactly like that in the tab of Excel. And it wouldn't use a template, it would create a new Excel document that had just the data.
Okay. That's exactly what I was asking.
Yes. The default, the XLS report renderer does that. So, I mean, I guess I should show that because that used to be available by default, and I removed it. But everything is now based on these report designs, and this is very quick. If I go back into that report, and I want to reactivate that renderer, I can add the XLS report renderer. Very confusing because there's that in the Excel template one, but it's called the XLS report renderer. It doesn't require any configuration at all. You just have to say I want it, and I want to call it my default Excel output. And now when we go to run that report, that will be available in there as well. And you can choose that. You can give it a date, blah, blah, blah. I can view that and something bad happens. Oh, there it is. So you have 3 tabs, one per data set. This one still has nothing in it. This one has, like I said, it flattens it out. It doesn't show it as that grid, unfortunately. And then there's the indicators, which in this case are actually columns, they're not rows, so it shows it again in a flattened format like that. But so we might be able to iterate on this Excel template, this default Excel renderer to show some, you know, just like the web renderer has, you know, it looks at what is this type of data set. Okay, let's make this default format, what's this type, this default format. The Excel one doesn't do that, it just says export a table out. There's a lot more of the logic in there. If we could, with just a little bit more effort, make these things look a little bit prettier, that was useful.
One thing that might also be nice is being able to export this before you render it to show like the hash tags in this kind of template.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and we definitely, one of the things I want to do is exactly that, provide sort of default or templates to use with the text or the Excel template renderer. So you could say, given this report of our design, first, give me a starter template